Good evening, everyone. My name's Chris Prince. I'm the Dean Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Faculty of Business and Law, and on behalf of Leeds Beckett University and Leeds Business School, I'd like to welcome you to the first of this season's Leeds Business School lecture series. And it's good to see so many people here, and it's good also to have our sponsors, Yorkshire Bank, here with some of their representatives. So thank you to the bank for sponsoring tonight's event. We start off with a couple of very big issues, and it's good to see so many people here about Devolution, Northern Powerhouse and the region. And there is probably no better person than tonight's guest speaker to actually talk to us about these important events, as Tom Riordan, Chief Executive of Leeds City Council, is obviously at the heart of all of these issues, and I'm sure we will be in for a very interesting and thoughtful talk. The idea is that Tom will talk for about half an hour, which will leave us about half an hour for questions, because I'm certain there will be a number that follow this. So all it leaves me to do now is introduce Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and good evening, everybody. It's great to see such a wide range of people in the room and such a large number of people in the room. I think it's the issue rather than me, because it has captured a lot of people's imaginations. It's also great to see people that I've worked with over the years. I've been working on this agenda since probably 1998, I think, which makes me feel quite old. But through a series of incarnations, I guess, in different organisations, I've been interested in this agenda of the North, of how we get more ability to shape our own destiny, and how we actually make people's lives better in this part of the world. And I didn't start out knowing this was going to be my vocation, but I guess I've accidentally stumbled upon it, and it's something that I very, very strongly believe in. I'd just like to start by thanking Leeds Beckett for this series of guest lectures, Yorkshire Bank as well for sponsoring it, and also a rather sort of dodgily sounding organisation, the Yorkshire Mafia, who have organised Leeds Business Week for us, who have done a brilliant job, and there's so many events happening, and there's such a buzz about the city. After the British Art Show coming to Leeds, an opening on Thursday night, followed by 65,000 people in the city centre for Light Night. Those of you who were around to see a whale down by the river, I never thought I'd see that. I don't know how it got there, but it was mightily impressive. And then, of course, we do have the world's best rugby league team in this city, with apologies to those of you who don't support the Leeds Rhinos, who completed the treble this weekend. But there are other issues as well to talk about, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do today. I think there are a few students in the room, so I remember my days as a student. You'll be surprised to hear it was before the internet, it was before mobile phones, we didn't have text messaging or Twitter or Facebook. My kids just cannot understand that life. They don't know how we ever contacted each other or knew where we all were, but we did have a life like that. But in that period, I used to make up for usually a lack of research that I'd done for an essay by finding a really good quote at the start of an essay. And of course, there's lots of academics in the room who will see that as basically a trick that students who haven't read enough use all the time. So you make your choice about whether you use this or not. But the Mayor of Denver said, and it's a great quote and one that I wish I had come up with, that the 19th century was about empires, the 20th century was about nations, and the 21st century will be about cities. And I think that's a really interesting point to start, because if you think about this city and how we have an effect on all our lives and how we make it a better place, then increasingly, because of globalisation and because of somehow the shrinking of the influence of national politics, we are much more, I think, we have a much bigger opportunity than we've ever had in the past to actually make things happen here and to make sure that we do shape our own economic destiny. And the statistic that has often been quoted, which isn't an exact science, is that 95% of the decisions that affect a city like Leeds or a city region like West Yorkshire, the Leeds City region, or a region like Yorkshire, the North, whichever way you want to describe it, 95% of those decisions take place outside this city. So most of them take place in London, in a place called Whitehall, with a group of government departments. And I used to work in Whitehall, and I used to be one of the junior civil servants who, when the minister had a decision to make, then it comes all the way down the food chain in Whitehall to this junior, new, usually, civil servant to make the decision. Now, the best example I can give you, which just, gives you the picture, is that if we want to put a roundabout in Leeds, we have to seek Secretary of State approval. Now, we're a big city. We're the third biggest city in the country. We're one of the great cities of Europe. We have a whole range of things that we can do, but we can't actually be trusted to put a roundabout in. Now, what happens is that goes into the centre and it goes down that food chain, and someone sits there in Whitehall and thinks to themselves, how the hell do I know? And they ask local people and they take the views of the local council and everyone else, and then they make a decision. So really what this is all about is, it's actually not about my generation necessarily. I think this is about the next generation, of which many of you are in the room, actually having much more ability to shape what happens in the place that you live in and the place that you work in. And although it's a really technical agenda, I just wanted to start by trying to get across to you that this matters. It matters if you can't afford to get to work, to try and get in to do a training course at the college or the university, because at the moment we can't affect the bus routes in our city. It matters if you have an ambition to have a career in digital technology or law or financial services or manufacturing, because we hold none of the levers that will help those businesses who want to grow in those areas do so. If you want to make sure that your parents and your grandparents are cared for properly into the future, we can't have an impact on the way the NHS makes decisions about where they deploy local care provision in our city. So whichever generation you're from and whatever political complexion you are, this matters, and it's something that we have got to put right, and it's what this stuff is all about. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. I'll now do a bit of this will sound very chippy, all of this. I can guarantee I'll be a chippy northerner now, because that's, I guess, one of my professional stereotypes that I'm turning into. But the North as an area has been, if you think about the last time you heard about the North in the news, or you last on the TV, or you last read an article about the North of England in a national newspaper, or maybe the last time that you saw an article in a journal about the North of England, I can almost guarantee that 9 out of 10 times it will have had a negative slant to it. It will be about managing economic decline. It will be about problems of social cohesion. It'll have been about the weather. It'll have been about a whole range of things that are not necessarily positive. So if the marketeers looked at it, it would come out negative rather than positive. Yet, the North of England is, if we were a country, bear with me, this is the future, not necessarily, but if we were a country, we'd be the 21st biggest economy in the world. we'd have a population bigger than 130 countries in the world. We have 33 universities like this one, and we've had 37 Nobel Prize winners. We are contributing a massive amount to the UK economy and growing. We have fantastic cities. We're all pitched against each other. So my big problem is I'm not Sir Howard Bernstein over in Manchester. John Mothersall's problem is that he's not doing as well over in Sheffield as we are in Leeds sometimes. And so it goes on. We're all pitched against each other, yet I don't know about you, but if I go back 15 years and I compare all the great cities of the north to what they are now, they've all had a renaissance, they've all had a resurgence. They're great places to go and visit and to go and live and to study. Yet when we hear people, we talk to people in Europe, they're baffled by the fact that our country is so centralised around London, and there's this obsession in the political class, in the media, in the fashion industry, in the commercial area. It's almost like if you're not national and you're not in London, then you by definition you can't be quite as good. And so we're trying to break something that's bigger than just, you know, a chippy council chief exec trying to get hold of a few more powers. Actually, this is about the psyche of the whole country. And in the context of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and London receiving much more ability to shape their own destiny, and when you saw, as I did, and looked enviously at the great debate that Scotland had about whether they should have independence or not, I was left thinking, we've never even been allowed to have that debate. When the assemblies were turned down, that was turned down by the North East. It wasn't turned down by Yorkshire. And maybe we would have turned it down at the time because actually we weren't really offered anything of substance. Devolution in the past in England has been crumbs at the table. It's been offering bits of power, little bits of money to just see if we'd change the governance of our area to suit what was perceived as being a weakness by Whitehall. So the north of England is actually a powerhouse, and where you've got to hand it to George Osborne, he has actually taken this agenda and turned it into something that has alerted the interest of a lot of people. We've been out recently as a city to China, to Singapore, Kuala Lumpur. We've been to Munich, and each time the ability to speak and to project ourselves as the north of England has actually been quite compelling in terms of attracting investors, other cities to take much more of an interest in what we were doing. It's got us through the door in a way that we haven't been able to achieve before. When they're through the door, actually they're much more interested in the city itself and what you stand for and what your labour market is and your housing market. So it's a means to an end. It's not a big end in itself that's going to, you know, transform all our economies, in my view. But it is a very useful new policy lever, a story that we can use internationally. So we were, myself and Howard and others from other cities across the north, were on a panel with the G4 countries of the Netherlands at the recent conference in Munich. And The Hague, Amsterdam, Rotterdam and Utrecht. And we were all able to talk about the collaboration that we were doing. And at the end of the session, someone put the hand up from the Scandinavian countries, and they said, well, we're thinking of doing something like this now because it's been so successful so far. So the Northern Powerhouse, as an idea, as a policy proposal, big thumbs up from me. I think it's a big step forward. However, big caveat, very big caveat, there is virtually nothing of substance behind it yet in terms of how it has affected things on the ground in our cities and our regions. So we had the pause of the Transpennine Transport Rail link and then the unpause. So we're all supposed to be doing cartwheels because we're back at the same place that we were 6 or 9 months ago. We have very interesting ideas coming through about devolution for all of our areas. So, you know, there's a lot of good progress. We've actually also worked together very much on rail franchises, where we've set up a new body called Rail North and part of what we call Transport for the North, that's going to get some real money from government, and that's been pledged already. And the rail franchises that we've managed to negotiate are actually better than they would have been. So there's going to be more frequent services, the trains are going to be better, and it's going to make a difference. But it's not going to transform our economies. So there's much more to do, and we are still in a position where we get the cast-offs in terms of trains. Any of you who've chugged along to various places on the train recently in our part of the world will know that we get the second or third rate trains out of London and the South East, which are considered good enough for us once they aren't considered good enough for the south of England. So I told you I'd sound chippy, but it's important that you understand that there's a big opportunity from the Northern Powerhouse, but we need to see real change happening if it's going to be made to work. So that's the North. So let's talk about the issue of devolution and the region in the second half of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to divide that up. So I'm going to talk about the areas of policy that we're trying to get devolved. I'm going to talk about geography, which turns out to be much more political than everyone had realised. And then I'm going to talk about governance. So the amazing, extraordinary, magical, mystical figure of an elected mayor that we've been lacking for so long, that is again going to come in, sweep in, and transform our economy and unite us in a way that we've never been united before. So that's the third bit. So the first bit about policy. So what we've tried to do is to take advantage of good things that are happening already. So on transport, you may feel that we haven't done anything for years on transport in Leeds. Actually, we've been doing a lot. So we've got Park and Ride started. We've got a clear strategy on Park and Ride that's been very successful so far. We're announcing proposals today for the train station to be revamped as a hub of national infrastructure. So by the time HS2 happens, assuming it does happen, our train station will be as important a bit of infrastructure and transport in the country as Gatwick Airport. So at the moment, we have about 25 million people use Leeds train station every year. That'll be about 36 million in about 10 years' time. We're also going to pedestrianise City Square, take general traffic out of City Square. We want to put a much more effective low carbon approach into our city to help air quality in the city centre and in the surrounding communities. We want to put electric charging infrastructure into the city centre. We want to make it much more of a European feel, I would say, to the city for pedestrians and cyclists. And it's still, we know, not good enough and not safe enough for cyclists in too many parts of our city. But that's our ambition. But it's not just for Leeds, because it's about Bradford and Wakefield and Huddersfield and Halifax and York and Harrogate, all those areas that surround Leeds as an economic centre and are economic centres in their own right. We want the transport to link them up much better. And the best, if I had to leave you with one idea about devolution, if we'd have had the sort of devolution that we're asking for now, we would have a tram system in Leeds by now. The fact is that for 20 years there's been a game of tennis going on between the government and whoever was in power in Leeds, and we've never got to the point where we could get a tram system in place. There's a great opportunity for us to, in the next phase, to have a metro system, whether that's a tram or tram train, whether it's how big the trolleybus element of that will be, because it will be hopefully a big element. All of that integrated in a way that will make it much easier and cheaper and more effective to move around our area of 3 million people. So transport, we're trying to get hold of bus commissioning, we're trying to get hold of the transport spending around that area, we're trying to do more. Houses, lots of people in the room, it will be very, very difficult, much more difficult for you to afford to rent a house at the moment and to then buy a house in the future than it would have been for my generation. And that's not fair, that isn't right. We've got to build more homes. We know it's controversial. In Leeds, we're increasing the number of homes built in our area. We've doubled it in the last 2 years. It's over 3,000 a year now. But we still don't have the ability to unlock the brownfield land sites and the often sites that are owned by central government that actually they don't need anymore and that we could utilise for not just house building but for building new places that fit in with the federal nature of our economy and our places. Leeds is a collection of towns and villages. It's never really been a city in the widest sense of a London. It's most people voted not to come in 1973, but we are a city. We're a great city, but it's about keeping that distinctiveness of the Morleys, of the Weatherbys, the Beestons, the Hunslets, and getting that civic pride to shine through and getting people to be able to live in those places, walk around in those places, work in those places in a way that we aren't able to at the moment. So we need more powers over that. Skills policy is like the Schleswig-Holstein question. 3 people understand it. One is dead, one's mad, and the other one works somewhere in Department for Education or Biz. We've got to change all of that. We've got to have a singular approach where we link up businesses and our colleges, our universities much more effectively. We've shown in the stuff we've been given so far that we can get 3 times the impact at 3 times the speed in getting young people into work. It's just an absolute no-brainer to give us more control over that skills agenda, especially when resources are reducing. So, you know, businesses are going to power the economy of the local area. They're the ones that are going to make create the extra wealth and create the jobs that we need, and we've got to give them the ability to hire people, to train people, to hook people up to those opportunities who at the moment, frankly, are cut off completely from the mainstream economy. And less than a mile away from here are people who come out with life chances that are, you know, much worse than people who live 5 miles up the road. And that is an absolute, you know, it's a crying shame. It's something we've got to change, and we'll never change it with all these funding streams, about 37 of them coming down into skills and regeneration and not allowing us to work. So there's another thing that we want to get hold of. And there are other areas as well which I could talk about around getting more control over the ability to attract inward investment into the area, getting some money. So European funding at the moment is run in every other European country. It's run by the cities and the regions. In the UK, which is obviously completely different to the rest of Europe, we have it run by central government. So it's run by the Communities and Local Government Department, who would much rather give it to us, but they're not allowed to at the moment. So we want to get hold of that. We want to be able to, we believe if you're going to have a direct election, then actually there should be a transparency and a link to tax and an ability in an election campaign for someone to stand on behalf on the policy of actually I'm going to cut taxes or I'm going to raise taxes. That would seem to us to be an obvious thing to do if you're going to put yourself out and be one of these mythological figures flying down on the dragons, you know, to save us all from the world that we live in. The directly elected mayor, surely we should be able to give the mayor the ability to, he or she the ability to raise taxes. So that's something that we're talking to the Treasury about, as well as what you may have heard the Chancellor announce, which is about business rates and an additional 2 pence on business rates. So all of that would go into making sure that we can deliver the things that I've talked about. So that's the policy areas. So geography, we have a wonderful, the Prime Minister was wrong, actually. I will go on the record. I know I'm being filmed and people are tweeting. The Prime Minister was really wrong when he made the joke about Yorkshire. And of course it was a joke, so no one gets too worked up about it. But we, yeah, of course we do have rivalries between each other. But the main thing he got wrong was that we don't like people outside Yorkshire. I think it's one of the most welcoming places that that you can come to. And certainly we found that with the Tour de France, with the people we've had in from Lille and Dortmund and Malaysia and Far East recently. they've loved coming to our city, and we continue to be very welcoming for refugees from Syria, for being a place that's proud of being compassionate and reaching out to the world. So I think actually we are a place that can project ourselves better, that is very welcoming. However, yes, there was an element of truth in what he said about the rivalries between the different areas. So we've got a decision to make about which is the geography, if we get this devolution, that we should base it on. So should it be a West Yorkshire area? Should it be a Leeds City region area, which is basically West Yorkshire plus York and 3 other districts from North Yorkshire, or should it be even bigger than that? And there's a big debate going on politically about that. It's all linked to politics, and if we're honest about it, there's an element of people looking at the numbers and thinking, well, which would be best for me, which geography would be best for my party. But actually, the leaders of the Leeds City region have been quite, I think, far-sighted in saying we're going to put that aside because a West Yorkshire area would fit with the Labour councils, if you like, much better. They'd be more likely to get a Labour mayor. But they're saying they want a Leeds City region area because that's the economy and that's the right economic footprint. And that's where 9 out of 10 people commute in and out of work. And the idea that Harrogate is not linked to Leeds economically, that York doesn't have a link to Leeds economically, and its link is to Scarborough or Hull or Beverley or Northallerton, I just think is misguided, is what I would say, or it doesn't stack up in terms of the data and the economics of all this. So the geography is quite important as well. And then the final area is the governance. So the key thing that, if you like, the string that's attached to all of these new powers and the ability to shape our own destiny much more and to get much more excited about all of this is a directly elected mayor. So the idea is that you have a single person directly elected who would who would chair a cabinet made up of the political leaders of the local councils, and they would make decisions about the things that I've talked about rather than people in Whitehall making decisions about them. So I think where we've been exercising our minds is that we understand that there is this desire and it's government policy about a single individual taking on that role. But our worry, I guess, is that in such a federal area, how would that person make sure that they were hearing all of the voices in the different geographies, all of the voices in the different communities, working in what is quite a pluralist area actually. There are some councils that are like places like Greater Manchester, very dominated by one council, but actually the majority of the councils in this area have 3 or 4 main parties who make up their decision making, and they actually, you'd be surprised, but lots of decisions are taken cross-party, and lots of decisions involve the ward members, the local ward members at the moment, in a way that you may not see from the outside. So we end up with, I think, a pretty good way of making decisions and a pretty transparent way of working compared to Whitehall, compared to the NHS, that I think we could apply to this part of the world. And so a directly elected mayor, I think, would need to come with some checks and balances, let's say. So they would need to work through a cabinet. I think they would need to be scrutinised. And the final thing I would say, I think, before opening it up to questions, is that there's a sort of missing link in all of this as well, which maybe is one of the reasons you're all here, because at the moment this debate's taken place in quite a small group of people who understand the intricacies of all this but haven't really been able to communicate enough with the outside world about what this might mean. And I think all of the councils are very keen, working with businesses through the local enterprise partnerships and the other organisations, to make sure that this doesn't just move decision making from Southwest 1 to LS1 or BD1. It's actually got to translate through to people's involvement on the ground, and that's not something that I think we've cracked yet. And it's something that I think we're very interested in, is how do you make this not just a technical change, but it's actually a change to the way we run this part of the world? Because just, you know, replicating the way it was done nationally won't work. And I don't think it will inspire people. I was the returning officer at our Police and Crime Commissioner elections. We got a mammoth turnout of 17%. So, you know, this has not necessarily excited people in the way that maybe people originally thought it would in terms of the police side of things. If we're going to not make that mistake again, we've got to somehow connect with people better and make this about their lives and make them want to come and vote about it. You could also say there should be a referendum about it, because, you know, 3 years ago we actually had referenda about directly elected mayors. They were just for the cities, and there was a 2-to-1 vote against. Now, the argument here is that actually it's a bigger area, so it's a different directly elected mayor. It's also genuinely new powers, whereas that wasn't really, a bit like the assembly issue. But it's something that I think is still an Achilles heel, and something that we all recognise, and something that I think we've got to try and put right through the next stage. But government policy is not to have referenda, so that's where we are, and I think we've just got to get on with it and either take a deal and do it and go with it, and we'll, you know, be doing what they're doing over in Greater Manchester at the moment. They've just agreed to do in Sheffield. Or we could decide that we don't want to do a deal, and actually what I've described isn't enough for us to have to give all this control over to a single individual who will have much more influence over these areas. And that's the big dilemma at the moment. That's the negotiation that's going on, and I think we're one of the parts of the country that will not just knee-jerk and take a deal on any basis. I think genuinely we could be one of the areas that turns it down. So that is something that makes it quite interesting, and it's very live as well. So things like today are very important for us to hear from you, some of your views, answer some of the questions that you've got, make it a bit more well known about what's happening, and I'm sure hopefully some of you have been tweeting about what I've said. Hopefully you won't have tweeted about what I said about the Prime Minister, but anyway, I was really nice about him, I seem to remember. And I know this has been videoed as well, so I'm stuffed anyway. But anyway, I'm conscious of how many people are in the room, and I really want to give people the chance to ask questions, to make observations if you've got strong views about things. I haven't covered everything, so that's my get out clause if you say, why haven't you mentioned X, Y or Z, because of the time, but I'll happy to do so with questions. So who wants to go first? Yeah.
What devolution of educational powers are likely to be given, if any?
So in terms of education and schools, nothing. So we've had a very clear message from government that they are not interested at all in devolution of any of the issues around academies and schools and that relationship that there is with national government. That said, we are pitching for more responsibility and flexibility around children's safeguarding and around post-16 education, which obviously will link up very closely with, need to link up very closely with the school's agenda. Okay. Hi.
So we've seen over the last few years a situation whereby local council budgets have been slashed horribly, and when one questions ministers about it, some of the services that have been cut, they say, oh well, that's down to the local council, it's down to their priorities to local area. Do you think there's a danger of the same happening here, that basically we'll get powers and then they'll just cut the budgets and then say, well, you couldn't sort it out, it's your fault?
Yes. I think that's part of the both political strategy, but actually economic strategy of the government. I think that local government has almost proved itself over the last 5 years in being able to reduce the costs of government in a way that Whitehall has found impossible. And so, for example, the pay bill of Whitehall has gone up 6%, the pay bill of local government has gone down 12%. But we've been victims of our own success because we've hidden the cost, we've managed, if you like, the reductions in a very effective way, you might say. And as a result, we may be on the receiving end of even more cuts to come. The dilemma for us, I think, is given that we're going to be cut further, and given that we still want to passionately have influence over our local areas, even if things are going to be passed down and reduced in cost, isn't it better that we have the ability to control them and to influence them, given that, you know, our influence and our budgets are shrinking in other areas? So it is quite a clever political strategy, but I don't think it's one that, you know, the leaders are going into with their eyes closed. And I think the spending review, which is due to be announced on the 25th of November, will make very clear where those cuts have fallen. And I think there'll be more. I think there'll be much more of a visible and maybe a more volatile political debate about who's to blame for the cuts in the next phase than there has been in the initial last 5 years. And I think that's to do with it's to do with where the government's got to, I think. Also the country's got to, because I think people maybe understand it a bit more. But I also think it's to do with where the Labour Party has got to as well, because, you know, they've clearly got a new agenda and they will have a new approach to a lot of this as well. Hi, at the back up there, yeah.
Tom, thank you very much for that. It was very interesting. I was fascinated by what you said about the influence of geography. And as someone who lives on the outskirts of Sheffield and moves up to work here each day, what do you think? Do you think a whole Yorkshire approach to devolution was ever a realistic possibility?
Answering your question straight, I think it was. I think there was a debate that took place, and I think that lots of the councils would have gone for it. I think the problem was the timescale which people had to take decisions, but also some very fundamental objections to it from councils that had perfectly legitimate concerns, I think. Because if you think about it, the higher you go and the bigger you go, the harder the justification for a single individual to take control over such a large area, the harder the ability to make it work, because it gets very unwieldy when you're talking about over 5 million people. And I think there were some very genuine discussions that took place. I think some parts of Yorkshire are more settled in feel more part of the family perhaps than other parts economically. So if you sat in Leeds or York, you're almost right in the middle of Yorkshire. If you sat in somewhere like Sheffield, you're 5 miles away from the Peak District. People travelling to work from Sheffield, from North Derbyshire, from North Nottinghamshire, and I just think, you know, that played its part in some of the thinking, and you can completely understand that. Personally, I think that there was a potential for this ability to actually interest people and excite people. They do like the Yorkshire thing, and I think particularly after the Tour de France, we would have had a chance to maybe appeal to a wider group of people. But it appears that chance has gone. Who knows what might happen in the future? But I think that was where it came from, and I think it justified as well feeling that, you know, if this is about the economy, is there really an economy of Yorkshire that you can talk about? Is it not 2 or 3 different economies? it's a tricky one, and I've tried to walk a tightrope in answering your question because I can't say too much. But I mean, everyone knows my background. You know, I think there's a big advantage to the Yorkshire brand. I think, you know, we need to work together and collaborate within Yorkshire, and we will, I'm sure, continue to do that. I'll just come across here because I haven't looked over here. Anyone? Hi.
If we could keep all the money that we create in this part of the world and spend it on developing the Northern Powerhouse, is it enough, or do we need to be pump primed from outside to get it away?
So this is where geography gets quite interesting. So in Leeds, yes, we do have enough money, and in Leeds as a city we have the ability to, we would have more than our fair share, so we're a net contributor to the UK economy. If it's the Leeds City region, no, because you bring in places who have, you know, more challenges, more public spending for the exchequer. But interestingly, we are just below the line, and the strategy that we've got is to go from a net taker to a net contributor to the UK economy as a city region. And we believe that's all about Leeds and Bradford, for example, who are separated by a field in Carverley, but you'd think it was a million miles away from the history of collaboration there's been, and not just politically but economically, the business community, I could even say the academic community, others. You know, there just hasn't been that collaboration, whereas if you put them together, we're bigger than Birmingham. So, you know, with Bradford's strengths of, you know, a growing young population, an entrepreneurial spirit, a, you know, fantastic cultural, capability, good manufacturing, some headquarters, together with Leeds's, you know, financial services, healthcare, digital, you know, the success that we're seeing in the city centre every day now. Put them together, it's compelling, and we believe actually if you let us control that money, we'd be able to use it much more effectively to improve the productivity of this part of the world, because one of the first things you'd do would be make it much easier to commute between Leeds and Bradford, and you know, make it much easier to commute between the different areas in and out of the particularly Leeds city centre, but other centres as well. So yeah, I think that's the big opportunity for the UK. This is why it matters, and I think that's why the Treasury have got interested in it, because with reducing resources they can see that we could do more. Hi.
Hi. You talked a lot about a growing economy in this area, and I know there's a lot of service sector in Leeds and a lot of retail, but that actually requires freight, it requires logistics. And Manchester Devolved Powers, they dedicated a particular freight officer, a team of people, Transport for London, they've got a freight team. Has Leeds got any plans, or the region got any plans for a freight section in that policy making powers?
I think I think we have, and I think Transport for the North now is being set up. It's got a new chief executive that's just been announced. The chair will be announced shortly. It's getting resources from national government, and I think freight. Obviously, there are local issues around freight, but if we're being serious about freight, you'd be thinking about the whole of the north. Yeah. And you know, the work that I was involved in when we were talking about something called the Northern Way, which was the sort of, I guess, the predecessor of Northern Powerhouse. The research came out that showed that if you drew a line from Hull to Liverpool, and you analysed the freight, that 50% of the freight that ended up in the southern ports originated north of that line. So the ability to use Hull and the Humber ports, to use Liverpool, is a massive opportunity for us, and again would increase pretty much overnight the productivity of many of the businesses who operate in the north of England. So I think we absolutely see the importance of freight. I think freight is increasingly important for the discussions we're having on rail and the HS2 conundrums that we've got around line of route and station and capacity. So yeah, I think we're absolutely on that page, and I think it's the sort of area that, you know, we've suffered because we haven't had that capability before. And so yes is the answer. I mean, I can't say whether there'll actually be a unit, because that's for the new chief exec to decide, but freight is one of the major priorities of the transport strategy that we've put in place. So the idea that we wouldn't have someone working on there is unthinkable, I would say.
Well, that's good to hear.
Okay. Hi.
Tom, you've just made a very fleeting glance there to HS2. Our business in financial services based in Yorkshire, our 4 main competitors are based in the City of London. We play the Yorkshire card. We like to think that we do that reasonably successfully. So what are the benefits to this region for HS2? And are you, as a council, in favour of that? I've lost a little bit of sort of where cities and councils are on HS2.
So we are in favour of it, because I think, you know, as I say, we've been around and about recently. We want to be more outward looking. We want to get around the world and make sure that we're getting the investment that we need into our area. It's all part of our strategy to become more self-sufficient. We don't want to rely on handouts from government. We don't need necessarily central government to fund a lot of the infrastructure projects that we've got in this part of the world. So for instance, you know, from our leader, Councillor Judith Blake's visit to Singapore and China, there's 2 big housing projects and economic projects that have come through with some major investment behind them. And I think when you start looking at things from a global perspective and a European perspective, you realise that being 2 hours away, bit over 2 hours away from the world's financial capital, and then only almost an hour and a half away from it, is a very compelling asset for us as a city and as a city region. And it's something that we need to build on. And if the capacity of the rail, if the projection of rail passengers increases, as it has done over the last 10 years, and no one has any reason to think it won't, then we'll be standing up all the way to London on the East Coast Main Line. It'll be breaking down much more over the next 10, 20 years. And so there's a big capacity issue about making sure that it works as well. And I think the other thing is that don't just think London. If anybody's tried to travel from Leeds to Birmingham recently, or Leeds to Nottingham, Leeds to Sheffield, we did a study when I was in Yorkshire Forward that showed the Leeds-Sheffield links are the worst in Europe compared with any other 2 European cities in such proximity. And so I think HS2 is about much more than London versus the north. I think it's about linking up our cities in a way that would open up massive opportunities. So, for example, the manufacturing zones, the big manufacturing centres of our country would be transformed and linked into almost a single area if you got the HS3 link as well, working well. And if you think about that sort of swathe of manufacturing centres from the Midlands through to Sheffield and then up to Leeds and across to Manchester, then, you know, there's a tremendous opportunity for us to actually, again, reduce our reliance on London. I've heard the arguments about, you know, won't it make more good people commute to London from this part of the world? But I think what you'd gain from the things that I've talked about massively outweigh what you would lose. The thing that's got to be right is the station location, and at the moment the current location is wrong for Leeds and for the Leeds City region. It's too far away from the current station. So we're working with the HS2 team to look at how we can push it much closer, so that there's in my view, you should have almost a King's Cross St Pancras type feel to, you know, the new development, and that will help people in the other parts of Yorkshire and the city region use it, because if it's a 15-minute walk away in the rain, then people are going to just drive and use the East Coast Main Line. So there's an economic case for that as well.
I'm allowed just to come back on one particular point. I accept what you've outlined and articulated as far as the infrastructure is concerned. I do actually believe, though, that our working pattern and our way of working in the next 10 years will be so radically different from what it is today that it will make HS2 just absolutely a complete and utter waste of money. We can't just use existing numbers and extrapolate them for the next 10, 20 years. It's just not the way that it's going to work.
One of the things
we're
that
not going to work that way.
Sure, one of the things I didn't mention, which I think agrees with your point, is the idea that you gain huge productivity improvements by reducing the time by, half an hour. I don't know about you, but I quite enjoy my train journeys if I can get a seat, and I actually catch up on some work. And you because of Wi-Fi and these wonderful devices we all have, you can actually work much more effectively. That said, what I said before about capacity is that, have you tried working standing up on a train for an hour and a half or 2 hours? Because that isn't as easy, and I think that's the alternative. We've got to have digital infrastructure along the lines of the same sort of thinking as we should have HS2. Okay, hi.
Yes. Very interesting talk, thank you for that. The term Northern Powerhouse certainly suggests that it's sexy, for want of a better word, but it's about regenerating the economy. What I'm worried about, and you hinted at it, is what about regenerating democracy, in the sense that 70% of people voted for police commissioners. How many people vote in local government? How many people vote nationally? Unless there's something built into it that re-engages people, I think the story will be not a success.
I do agree with you. How you do that is another matter, and I think it's how do you, because if you talk to the young people who've stayed in the room are very impressive, I've got to say. But if you talk to people about, are you bothered about politics? A lot of people say no. Are you bothered about how you get in and out the transport system? Are you bothered about getting people being able to get jobs who live in Little London and Beeston and Chapeltown? We've got to come up with a totally different way of communicating with people, and I think I get a bit sort of theoretical now, but I think there's something big happening in the world actually, where if institutions don't change, then they're going to die. And you can see it starting to happen. And you could say that, it's happening politically, it's happening, I can see it happening with the European Union if they don't change. I can see it happening, you could use examples like the BBC, like councils and local government. If you don't, even businesses, big businesses, you look at the big technology businesses, and who are the ones who are really blazing a trail and going to make a difference. And I think if the whole thing will fail if we don't all agree that it's about changing the way we're going to govern ourselves and the way we're going to run ourselves. And that's the big challenge, because that means breaking down lots of vested interests and lots of ways of working that, to be fair, local government actually has made the biggest change on in the last 5 years. Hi.
You talk about the new powerhouse having a taxation ability. There is a possibility that it needs to have a taxation ability that what's earned here is kept here. I'm thinking, you spoke about Schleswig-Holstein earlier. Hamburg is one of the poorest states in Germany, because everybody lives in Hamburg, works in Hamburg, earns their Hamburg salaries, and pays the taxes in Schleswig-Holstein or Nordrhein-Westfalen. Now, I think there might be some need to have some form of tax that the gentleman from Sheffield who comes every day, if Sheffield isn't in the powerhouse and there's another powerhouse, he needs, if he's earning his money here, he needs to be giving some of it back to here, not giving it back to where he lives.
Just a one-way.
I won't ask you to answer that. I think it's really interesting because there is a feeling that many people, like myself actually, benefit from the success of Leeds city centre and get great star out of that and success out of that. But actually, do the communities in parts of Leeds benefit enough from the economy and the success that we have in that city centre? And somehow this is part, I think, of rethinking the way we work, the way we govern ourselves. I think that's the sort of issue that we would need to really think through. And it's why actually you need a wider economic footprint, because with the localisation of business rates, the big weak, that in some ways it's great. The big risk is that the strong will get stronger and the weak will get weaker, and it'll exacerbate the north-south divide. So I think we have to collaborate more and work together more if we're going to make sure that what you described doesn't happen. And there's got to be it's called, wonderful word, equalisation, for those of you who are techie, in local government finance. You basically need a way of making sure that the areas that need greater spending because they have greater need, actually there's some transfer of resources to those areas from the areas that don't need it. One example, if we just left it as it is, Westminster gets £1.6 billion in business rates. It only spends, the cost of running Westminster is £300 million. So unless we do something, Westminster are going to be sort of giving money away to people rather than actually having to make sure that there's the obvious benefit of that they get from having the Parliament and the London effect there is shared out. Hi.
Tom, you described the governance structure with the mayor and so on. Do you think that is sufficiently strong to prevent this whole machinery falling into a narrow political group who would then use it through a political ends?
I personally think that actually in this part of the world that wouldn't happen, and I think because we are constructing it in a cabinet system. And the other thing that we're going to have to do is make sure that all the main political parties, and by main I mean there's probably 5 or 6 in this area, or at least 3, possibly more, have a genuine ability to be part of the decision-making process. Because I think if you don't have that, then I think you let yourself in for what you've described. The exact sort of the exact way you put that together is being debated at the moment. So do you do that in your cabinet? So in the combined authority at the moment, we have opposition groups on the main body. We have the LEP chair on the body as well. Or do you do that underneath and have a sort of committee or assembly structure beneath that makes sure that when decisions get taken, all the people are around the table? Are we out of time?
I'm conscious of the time, Tom, and
Yeah.
I know your other commitments this evening. So I think first of all we need to show our appreciation to Tom. That was a really interesting and very insightful view of where we are, and hopefully what we may have in store for us in the future. Talking of which, in the future, if you haven't got a copy of the booklet which has a list of our other lectures this coming season, then please take one. The next event is on the 27th of October. And finally, can I just thank our sponsors, Yorkshire Bank, for this evening as well. And most of all, thank you for coming and have a safe trip home. Thank you.